The time for member statements has concluded. Questions without notice. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, for the first time since Federation, and at the Prime Minister's direction, the government voted down a referral to the Privileges Committee, given precedence by the Speaker. Why is the Prime Minister running a protection racket for the member for Pearce?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. The practice, page 771 of practice, makes things very clear.
Members on my left.
That the opinion by the Speaker, and I quote, does not imply a conclusion that a breach of privilege or a contempt has occurred, or even that the matter should necessarily be investigated, Mr Speaker. That's what the practice says very clearly. The House determined this matter yesterday, and the government took a position that the broader issue of members of this place and the other place who are faced with pursuing defamation proceedings, that there should be clearer rules and clearer guidelines, Mr Speaker, to members of this place.
Members on my left.
So, Mr Speaker, they can take decisions. Now, that is what we have referred, Mr Speaker, to the Privileges Committee. The suggestion that somehow things are not being looked into, that things have not been referred to, is not the case. Mr Speaker, we have referred these matters directly to the Chair of the Privileges Committee to consider these issues, because this has implications for members of this House on both sides, Mr Speaker, as it does have implications for members who sit in the other place. So, Mr Speaker, we want to ensure that the rules are very clear. We're not going to play politics with this, Mr Speaker. If those opposite want to use the procedures of this House to smear, they'll do so, but that will reflect on them.
The member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Tonight, Melbourne's lockdown will end owing to the efforts of our citizens, like those in my community of Chisholm, to roll up their sleeves and get vaccinated. Will the Prime Minister please inform the House how the national plan is working to reopen Melbourne and the rest of Australia so we can safely live with the virus and recover from the pandemic?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Chisholm for her question and being here in this chamber, Mr Speaker. As she knows, it is an important day for Victoria and particularly for Melbourne. Victoria has reached 70.51% double-dose vaccination. Mr Speaker, that is an extraordinary achievement, and I indeed join with the Leader of the Opposition of thanking all of those who played such a critical role, particularly our health workers, Mr Speaker, but also our mental health workers and all of those who played such a critical role in ensuring that we can achieve that rate, Mr Speaker. In Victoria, that single-dose rate is now approaching 90%, Mr Speaker. And the member's own electorate, these figures are reflected in her own local government area, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, in Victoria, if they were a country, they would have a single-dose vaccination rate, Mr Speaker, in fact a double dose which is greater than Finland, sorry, single dose greater than Finland, the Netherlands, France, the United Kingdom, and on double dose, Mr Speaker, higher than the United States. This is an extraordinary achievement, Mr Speaker, for the people of Victoria under the national plan. Now, Mr Speaker, I will never forget the incredible role played by the member for Chisholm and the Chinese-Australian community at the outset of the pandemic. When I go back to February of 2020, Mr Speaker, as people were returning from China and coming back, and I was with the member for Chisholm in Box Hill at the time, and they were observing the social distancing, they were wearing masks, they were taking precautions. And I believe that that community in Box Hill, Mr Speaker, played a central role in the savings of thousands and thousands and thousands of lives here in Australia, and I commend the member for Chisholm for her leadership in that community, which has taken us forward. So I thank all of those who have been involved, Mr Speaker. Victoria has had the longest and the hardest and most difficult road through this pandemic. They have endured more lockdowns than any other part of the country, Mr Speaker, and they have endured and they have shown great character and great patience. And so tonight at 11:59 it will indeed be a time in Victoria for them to truly celebrate what they have been able to achieve as they claim their lives back through these higher rates of vaccination. Mr Speaker, borders coming down. ensuring that children are going back to school, that people are going back to work, that families are being reconnected, that businesses are being back in business. And, Mr Speaker, our government stood by those Victorians. Some 10.8 million vaccines delivered in Victoria, 685,000 brought forward, $51 billion worth of economic supports, per capita higher support to Victoria than any other state or territory in the Commonwealth, and some $6 billion and more just in the most recent Delta outbreak. Mr Speaker, Victoria is opening safely. It will stay safely open under the national plan.
Has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And my question is addressed to the Prime Minister. It has been more than 1,000 days since the Prime Minister stood next to the member for Pearce and announced he would create a National Anti-Corruption Commission. Why hasn't the Prime Minister done his job and delivered on the National Anti-Corruption Commission that he announced with the member for Pearce?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. There have been a number of consultation drafts on the government's proposal, and, Mr Speaker, we'll be moving to finalise legislation in relation to this matter, and I look forward to the opposition supporting it.
The member for Mallee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on how the Morrison-Joyce government is getting on with the job of building essential water infrastructure that is creating jobs and supporting a strong economic recovery for Australians living in regional communities?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for Mallee for her question and note the marvellous work, especially on things such as the South West Loddon pipeline, which has been a vital piece of infrastructure for her area. I've noted even in local media that it was dubbed the best development in the region since electricity. It's quite a statement. But by reason that this Commonwealth government, this coalition government, has provided that infrastructure that has made people's lives in feeding stock and providing water for domestic uses so much better. And it's not just that, Mr Speaker, but the member for Mallee and the previous member for Mallee have managed to get well in excess of $100 million on issues such as the Sunraysia modernisation project. The Sunraysia modernisation project, the member for Mallee recently was responsible for a $7.8 million upgrade, 60 jobs in the construction. But it was only before that the coalition was involved with a $120 million investment in that Sunraysia project. And the member for Mallee's work doesn't stop there. The Midiamo District Reticulated Water Supply is $29 million there, which provided secure pressurised water supply to sustain a viable regional economy with improved service delivery and reliability. Mr Speaker, the Coalition continues on its work in water infrastructure. Scottsdale irrigation in Tasmania was completed in May 2020. I know the member for Braddon, the member for Bass have all been very strong in support of those and what it has done to drive and secure the economy of central Tasmania. In Queensland, the member for Capricornia and the member for Flint, because in the member for Flint's seat, Rookwood Weir. And this is going to provide, obviously, further millions and millions of dollars annually in returns, of course, and also in a vast increase in employment in that area. And it only happened because of the continual support for that project from people such as the member for Flynn and the member for Capricornia, and also the coalition government, and also the senator in Central Queensland there, Senator Canavan. And Dungowan Dam in my own electorate, they continue the work on that. That's an important piece of infrastructure. Mr Speaker, as an anecdote, after they announce, usually we sell about, they sell about, I don't know, 10 blocks at best, 10 industrial blocks, maybe 6 to 10. After they announced that dam, they sold in excess of 60. Now, one organisation, that is Bayada, owned by the Camilleri family, are now moving a $600 million investment that will employ over 1,100 people. Now, Mr Speaker, that is a clear example, and there are many, many more, of how the coalition government, in the construction of this infrastructure, brings the jobs to regional areas and makes our whole nation a stronger place.
The member for Fremantle.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister's proposed national anti-corruption body had reason to believe there was evidence of serious and systemic corruption, would it have the power to investigate the member for Pearce's secret donations?
The Minister has the call.
Well, I do thank the member for his question, and of course we've been extremely clear in relation to the Commonwealth Integrity
Members
Commission.
on my left.
Mr. Speaker, we've been extremely clear that the Commonwealth Integrity Commission will have the power to examine serious criminally corrupt conduct, and it will have the same powers as the Royal Commission to investigate criminal corruption in the public sector. So we've been very clear about our model, Mr. Speaker. We have been consulting very extensively on it, and as the Prime Minister says, we look to the opposition to join with us in developing and implementing this model.
Members on my left, the member for Mayo has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Given the horrendous events now taking place in Afghanistan, will the government reconsider this year's budget cut to the humanitarian program that reduced refugee intake places from 18,750 to just 13,750 places?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. As the member will know, the government has been involved in significant efforts to bring people out of Afghanistan. In particular, during the evacuation, some 4,100 people were brought out of Afghanistan, over 3,000 of them coming to Australia. The majority of those were those who were seeking refuge here in Australia. The majority of those, Mr. Speaker, were those who had been locally engaged employees and their families. What the government has committed to do is to bring at least 3,000 people in under our refugee and humanitarian program this year, and if there are more that we can take this year, we will take them. I'm not putting a cap on how many we can potentially take this year. I see the 3,000 as the minimum that we would hope to take, and through the work of the National Security Committee, the work of the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Minister for Immigration, we have been diligently seeking to identify additional people who have been able to take themselves to a place where they've been also able to leave Afghanistan, and we've been able to bring them here to Australia as well, subsequent to the evacuation. Now, we will continue to do this, and we will not be restrained by what the current cap is on the refugee and humanitarian program. This has been a topic that I've been engaged in directly. We recently had a G20 leaders meeting that I participated in, where not only we were able to make reference to the work that we're already doing, but we are working with the Special Envoy in Qatar to ensure that we're working with other like-minded countries, with Canada, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, the United States and others, to ensure that we're providing safe channels for people to be able to come from Afghanistan and to be able to make their way into the various refugee and humanitarian programs that are being run by countries such as Australia. Now, Australia has the second highest per capita refugee and humanitarian program in the world. It is a generous program, and we run the best settlement services in the world. And we have a proud reputation of doing that. And we will continue to provide that support to those who are seeking our assistance through that program. It has the highest priority of our refugee and humanitarian program, and we're working closely through all of our offices and through all of our partners to provide as much support as we possibly can.
The member for Menzies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I ask the Treasurer, how is the Morrison government's strong economic management and the importance of sticking to our national plan ensuring our economy recovers strongly when restrictions ease, especially in my state of Victoria? And is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for Menzies for his question and acknowledge 3 decades of distinguished service in this place, Mr. Speaker, including as a Minister for Defence and in the national security space. Now, Mr. Speaker, today marks a significant milestone in Australia's road to recovery, with Victoria reopening, Mr. Speaker. After 77 days of Delta lockdown, restrictions are easing in Victoria. This is the day millions of Victorians have been waiting for. Kids are getting back to school, businesses are reopening, families are being reunited, Mr. Speaker. Victorians have done the right thing, going to get the jab in record numbers, 70% fully vaccinated, 80% in sight, 90% first dose, higher than the United Kingdom, Mr. Speaker. And today we say thank you. Thank you to the health workers in Victoria who have kept our community safe. Thank you to the teachers who have helped support our students. Thank you to the mums and dads who have supported their kids. And thank you to the small business owners who have supported their staff, Mr. Speaker. And so today is Victoria's Day as we move to the next phase with the reopening in the great state of Victoria. And, Mr. Speaker, I was asked, am I aware of any alternative policies? Well, we know that the Leader of the Opposition, he's come up with two big ideas in that role the last few years, Mr. Speaker. First there was the National Driver's Licence, which was going to turbocharge our economy. And second, there was a $6 billion conversation starter to pay Australians who've already had the jab.
The Treasurer can resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
The standing order barrier to tedious repetition.
I'll just say to the Manager of Opposition Business that doesn't apply to question time. The Treasurer has the call.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Leader of the Opposition doesn't want to be reminded that he had a $6 billion conversation starter to spend money to pay people who've already had the jab. And the Leader of the Opposition wanted our government to run with his policy. The only problem was that the shadow cabinet was running away from his policy, Mr. Speaker. But I tell you, there's one set of policies that the Labor Party will never run away from, and that's their plans for higher taxes. And that's why we weren't surprised that on the front page of The Australian there was plans that the Shadow Treasurer took to the Strategic Policy Review for a $27 billion tax on family and small businesses. $27 billion tax on 300,000 family and small businesses. We're getting on with the job of growing the economy, Mr. Speaker. Those opposite, if they ever got the chance, would put higher taxes on all Australians.
The member for Cooper.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Would the government's proposed national anti-corruption body have the power to investigate the now Minister for Energy securing meetings with the Environment Department about an investigation into the illegal poisoning of endangered grass on land in which he had an undeclared financial interest?
The Minister representing the Attorney-General.
Well, I do thank the member for her question, and I again make the point to the House that our government has considered very carefully the appropriate design considerations in developing the Commonwealth Integrity Commission, which will receive referrals from existing integrity agencies such as the Australian Federal Police and the Ombudsman. There are important design considerations here, Mr. Speaker, because we need to make sure that Commonwealth resources are not wasted on referrals which are purely used for political purposes, like the member for Isaac's 9 failed referrals to the Australian Federal Police. 9 times he's engaged in a political stunt.
The Minister can resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Yeah, this question on direct relevance, Mr. Speaker. The question is really specific. It refers to the government's proposed anti-corruption body and it refers to a specific instance from a minister and asks whether it would have the power to do it. It does nothing more. There's no alternatives and no opportunity to go where the minister's now going.
I appreciate the point the Manager of Opposition Business is making, but I do consider with these questions, I haven't really said so before, that I do give a little bit more tolerance, because on a strict reading of the standing orders I could rule the question out in asking for a legal opinion, but I don't want to do that because I think a strict reading of the standing orders would rule most questions out. And we'd be out of here within about 15 minutes. But I'll listen to the minister. He needs to be relevant to the question, which referred to one minister in particular.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And I was going to the issue of the design considerations, which obviously bear on the question the member has asked about the particular hypothetical factual circumstances she's addressed. But it is an important, relevant design consideration. The risk, the real and sensible risk, of frivolous referrals, because we've seen a pattern of frivolous referrals from the member for Isaacs. 9 failed referrals to the Australian Federal Police. I strongly suspect that that's more than the number of times he's been to his own electorate in this term, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the answer to the question is clearly that the Commonwealth Integrity Commission, under the model that we've extensively consulted on, is that the Integrity Commission will be able to receive referrals relating to allegations involving parliamentarians via 2 channels: referral by an integrity agency which has become aware of the matter and where there's a reasonable suspicion of a relevant criminal offence, and self-referral by the parliamentarian to whom the issue relates. So we have built this into our model, Mr Speaker. We have.
The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. Will the minister please update the House on Australia's vaccine rollout, as well as how the Morrison government is prepared to provide any booster vaccines if they are required?
The Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Lindsay. Her electorate, in particular the Penrith LGA, is at 94% first doses. It's helped lead the nation, and it's played a very important part in Australia achieving now an 85.8% rate for first doses and a 70.8% rate for second doses. This happens at a time when we've seen that the pandemic continues worldwide. Over 450,000 cases diagnosed in the last 24 hours. 8,800 souls lost, 8,800 lives lost worldwide. And so the scale and the scope of the pandemic continues in a way which is wreaking havoc on lives and communities around the world. And sometimes that is lost in terms of what is occurring on a continuing basis. Against that background, what we've seen with Australia's vaccination program, another 277,000 vaccinations in the last 24 hours, over 33 million doses, now almost 33.5 million doses administered. And this has led to the achievements that the Prime Minister and the Treasurer have talked about. Victoria now passing 70% double vaccination rate, about to achieve 90% in the next 24 hours of a first vaccination rate, joining New South Wales and the ACT. The ACT is now at over 98% in terms of its first vaccination rate. But perhaps most critically, our over 70s, the most vulnerable group, have a 98% vaccination rate. But in order to strengthen that, we have a booster program with 151 million vaccinations. The TGA is next week considering the final advice with regards to the Pfizer vaccine, the first of those vaccines to submit a booster application. And if that is approved, we are ready to go immediately. We have this year 40 million Pfizer vaccinations. Next year, 60 million Pfizer vaccinations. The following year, 25 million Pfizer vaccinations. An additional 15 million Moderna. An additional 51 million Novavax. And so we are in a position to continue that process immediately if there is medical advice to do that. But what all of this has done is save lives and protect lives. Saved over 30,000 lives in Australia compared with the OECD average. Saved over 45,000 lives compared with the terrible tragedies we've seen in the UK and the US. And for that, I want to say thank you to every Australian for coming forward to be vaccinated and to urge others to...
The member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Would the government's proposed national anti-corruption body have the power to investigate the now Minister for Regionalisation giving a grant to a shooting club of which she was a member?
The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I refer to your earlier comments, and it is clear that in the construct of that question, the honourable member is asking for a legal opinion of the Prime Minister, which is out of order.
No, just before I even call the Manager of Opposition Business, I said that on a strict ruling I could do that. I have not done that, and this question is it certainly does do that, but there's a long history of these sorts of questions being asked. It's just those asking them need to know that the answer can be rather broader than they anticipate. The Minister has the call.
I do thank the Shadow Attorney-General for his question. The Shadow Attorney-General, of course, is very keen on a model where QCs and SCs get to put on the robe and the wig. He's quite keen on the wig, is the Shadow Attorney-General, and he's quite keen on trousering 5 or 6 or 7 grand a day as well.
No,
Mr Speaker.
No, you can withdraw that term. That term has. You can just withdraw it.
I withdraw. I withdraw, Mr Speaker. And I don't criticise the Shadow Attorney-General for speaking up strongly for the interests of Senior Counsel and Queen's Counsel. I once made the mistake actually referring to him as a Senior Counsel. He corrected me. He's a Queen's Counsel. I respect that.
I just say to the Minister, his preamble is now over. He's taking rather too literally what I said.
I am surprised, Mr Speaker, that a respected Queen's Counsel would seek to use this forum to invite, as it were, anticipatory legal opinions from a minister. That's quite inappropriate, and I won't be doing it.
The member for Sturt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education and Youth. Will the minister outline how the new draft National Schools Curriculum proposes to teach Australian children about our rich history and our successful democracy?
The Minister for Education and Youth.
Well, can I thank the member for Sturt for his question and for his credible commitment to his electorate, to South Australia and to our great nation, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, as we come out of COVID and as kids go back to school in line with our national plan, we need a curriculum that lifts standards, that is less cluttered and that embeds evidence-based practices. But critically, we also need a curriculum that instills a love in our students of our great country, that teaches them about our rich history and about our democracy, because, Mr Speaker, we all know, certainly on this side of the chamber, that we live in the greatest country in the world, bar none. We're one of the wealthiest, most free, most egalitarian, most tolerant countries, not just today, but in the history of all of humankind.
Member for Dunkley.
And millions of people have migrated to this country precisely because of those reasons, Mr Speaker. And you think about some of the fundamental freedoms which underpin those core things, which make us so attractive for millions of people. It's the one person, one vote, the equality before the law, freedom of association and speech, universal education, strong human rights, an ability to start a business and earn what you keep, Mr Speaker, reward for effort. And these freedoms, they didn't happen by accident, but they came about because of hard-fought gains over centuries. We inherited such great institutions in the UK, and then generations upon generations, particularly in the 20th century, fought and in many cases died for those great freedoms, Mr Speaker. And that's why it's so important that those key principles, the key understanding, is embedded in our national curriculum so that students understand where our great democracy came from, so that they will defend it, Mr Speaker, just as previous generations have. And I, Mr Speaker, am not satisfied with the current draft which has been presented, because some of those core things which underpinned our democracy are not there. It has a negative view of our history. It has a negative view of Australia. It omits some of the great people in Australia's history and omits even things such as Christianity, more or less, even though it's one of the great influences on modern Australia. And Mr Speaker, again I speak about this desire to instil love of country into the national curriculum, into students, and the Labor Party again gets so upset. They get so upset when we dare to suggest that kids should learn about our democracy, should have pride in our country, should absolutely celebrate our democracy and make a contribution to it. And I don't understand why. The only reason I can suggest is because they equally share that miserable view of our nation and want our kids to equally have that miserable view of our nation. We won't stand for it, Mr Speaker.
The member for Dobell, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources and Water. The people of the Central Coast are opposed to an extension of Petroleum Export Permit 11, or PEP 11. PEP 11 will allow oil and gas exploration off the Central Coast, risk our precious marine environment and destroy local jobs. Will the minister support our coastal communities and reject this disastrous proposal today?
The Minister for Resources.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And just for a little bit of context and some facts for those who might be listening, PEP 11 stands for Petroleum Exploration Permit number 11. It's actually been in place since 1999, Mr Speaker, and we are, of course, considering an application right now. Now, I'll be taking advice from the regulator, which is NOPTA, but I have to say, Mr Speaker, I'm a bit surprised. I'm a bit surprised because this is not an application for a rig, it's not an application for an exploration well, it's not an application to go drilling holes looking for oil and gas, because the only people so far that have approved that in this area are those opposite when they were last in government. 2010, by the member for Watson, not this side, and yet you are here saying that what you did then is wrong now. Now, Mr Speaker, I'll say very clearly we are considering this on balance in regards to the law, in regards to the national interest, and of course we'll take into consideration the views of the community and we'll make a decision in due course.
The member for Reid.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts. Will the minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's world-leading Online Safety Act will hold platforms to account for harmful abuse online?
The Minister for Communications.
Well, I do thank the member for Reid for her question. Of course, she has a long-standing interest in the question of the safety of children, bringing to bear her expertise as an extremely well-qualified psychologist and with a distinguished record of private practice. And she has been a very strong advocate for the Morrison government's tough new Online Safety Act, passed the parliament just recently, will come into effect in January and will give Australians who are using the internet new protections that do not exist in any other country. The world's first adult cyber abuse scheme. Mr Speaker, adults who are the victim of online abuse, if it is abuse that is intended to cause serious harm, that's menacing, harassing or offensive, they will be in a position to report that to the E-Safety Commissioner if the platform does not act on their complaint. And our E-Safety Commissioner, Julia McGrath, a highly regarded former tech executive doing such a great job, she and her officials will have the power to issue a takedown notice. And if a takedown notice is issued against a platform that the E-Safety Commissioner has concluded that the material meets the statutory test, then the material must be removed within 24 hours. So this is a powerful means of dealing with the problem of trolls online. And if the platform does not act to remove the material within 24 hours, then the E-Safety Commissioner has the power to issue fines of up to $555,000 to companies and $111,000 to individuals. If that troll thinks that hiding behind an anonymity is going to protect them. What they need to know is that the E-Safety Commissioner will have the power under this Act to direct the social media company to hand over all identifying information that they have in relation to that account. And she will be able to use that power against the troll who has posted this material. What we've also done, Mr Speaker, as part of this legislation is we've increased the maximum criminal penalty for offences when people use a carriage service, that's to say the internet, to menace, harass or offend. We've increased the maximum criminal penalty from 3 years to 5 years imprisonment. We're committing a record $125 million of funding to online safety over the next 4 years, and we expect the platforms to lift their standards across the board. And our government has been very clear about that, from the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister. We are united in our expectation that we need to see better standards from the platforms, and we are standing up to provide those protections to Australians. The rule of law must apply online. We're making sure it does.
The member for Brand.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources. The Minister told Phil Corey of the Australian Financial Review that a $250 billion loan facility for the resources sector is the price of the National Party's support for net zero emissions by 2050. Can the Minister outline his proposal for a $250 billion loan facility for the resources sector?
The Minister has the call.
Well, thank you for the call, Mr Speaker, and I absolutely reject that. I did not say at any stage that there is a price. Mr Speaker, we are having a collegiate discussion with our colleagues. We are having a collegiate discussion in the Nationals Party room. We are having a collegiate discussion, as our constituents expect, Mr Speaker, on what is a serious matter. There is only those opposite who show the hypocrisy. Now, I can't tell from here, Mr Speaker, but I see a lot of scarves. If they're made out of acrylic, they come from the resources sector. They come from a sector that is delivering $346 billion into our economy over the next 12 months. Mr Speaker, I mean, seriously. So I say again, we will continue to work on serious policy. We will continue to deliver for this sector, a sector which was forecast in the midst of the pandemic to be down to 246, has put on over $100 billion into this economy in the next 12 months. We should celebrate the fact that it exists, not continue to talk it down and talk down our country.
The member for Fisher.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the Minister please update the House on how Australia's national security remains under threat of foreign interference and espionage? What action is the Morrison government taking to ensure that we stay vigilant to this pervasive threat in order to keep all Australians safe and protect our national interest?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Well, thank you, and I thank the member for his question, and I acknowledge and thank him for his long-standing interest in defence and national security matters. Mr Speaker, our government has never lost sight of the fact that there are many challenges to our safety and security in a very changing world. Now, it's without doubt that the threat environment is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. And I think it would shock most Australians to know that levels of espionage and foreign interference are higher now than during the Cold War. We know that there are foreign agents working with intent to damage our society and to undermine our security. We face threats from multiple countries. Their purpose is to influence the work of our democratic government to further their own interests and world view. In ASIO's annual report tabled this week, Director-General Mike Burgess said that espionage could well overtake terrorism as the principal security concern over the next 5 years. And that is not to downplay the serious terrorist threat that we face here. He said, and I quote, "Foreign spies are attempting to obtain classified information about Australia's trade relationships, defence and intelligence capabilities. They are seeking to develop targeted relationships with current and former politicians and current and former security clearance holders. They are monitoring diaspora communities in Australia and, in some cases, threatening to physically harm members of these communities. And that's the end of the quote. But we cannot let this pervasive activity undermine the social cohesion and unity that keeps our Australian communities safe. Every one of us in this parliament must remain aware of and alert to this threat in our daily activities, and we should be very careful not to underplay the danger. We cannot afford to be cavalier about the intentions of these characters, should our paths cross with them as we go about our duties. Now, the government is certainly taking these threats very seriously. That's why we are boosting ASIO's capability with record funding of $1.3 billion to enhance their operations into the future and to help keep us safe. We have legislated a range of new powers to help our law enforcement agencies detect and act on foreign interference threats, and we're working with the University Foreign Interference Task Force to ensure Australian universities have robust mechanisms in place to safeguard them against foreign interference. Australians can be assured that the Morrison governments take very seriously the issues of national security.
The member for Whitlam.
Speaker, question to the Minister for Resources. Minister, what does the government's modelling show is the economic impact of a commitment to net zero by 2050 for the resources sector?
The Minister for Resources.
Well, can I thank the honourable member for that question, and can I say, the honourable member, I've seen lots of modelling. I mean, that's what my department does, Mr Speaker. As the Minister for Resources, what you would expect. I mean, I've seen modelling from the International Energy Agency that says Australia's coal, demand for Australia's coal will continue to go up until 2030. They expect that it will be off-peak by about 20% in 2050. I've seen modelling that says our gas exports will continue to grow. I've seen presentations that continue to talk about critical minerals, Mr Speaker.
The Minister will resume his seat. I haven't called you yet. So. The member for Whitlam on a point of order.
Yes, I hate to interrupt the long run-off. Relevance?
Yes.
I didn't ask about international modelling. I asked about government modelling.
Yes, I understand that, but I'm not in a position to sort of reach a conclusion when the minister says his department shows him lots of modelling. And yeah, well, it's a government department, and I'm going to listen to the minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 25 seconds in. Now, my department has also shown me modelling about how we've got a shortfall in workers in the resources sector right now because they're going so well. Mr Speaker, the policies of this government continue to ensure the sector gets stronger. The policies of this government continue to ensure there are opportunities into the future. The policies of this government ensure that right through the pandemic, Australia maintained its reputation, maintained its delivery in terms of logistics and supply chains, maintained contracts into those critical locations like Japan, like South Korea, right across Southeast Asia. So, Mr Speaker, we continue to strongly support the sector. There is a range of modelling all over the place about all sorts of things. But in terms of my department and modelling that I have been provided by my department, it is about strengthening the sector. It's about growing opportunities. I mean, that is why, Mr Speaker, we're out there committing funds to ensure the critical minerals sector continues to grow. We know there are growth opportunities around the world for what results from critical minerals. We have an incredible resource in this country right across the spectrum, whether it's rare earths, whether it's lithium, whether it's a range of others. In fact, Mr Speaker, I had a discussion in recent weeks in Queensland with people who are looking to get out there and look at what could potentially be taken from previous coal mines in terms of overburden and actually extract further critical minerals from what was previous coal mines that are now currently no longer in use. So, Mr Speaker, we are looking at every opportunity. We are looking to ensure we continue to deliver for our country, to act in our national interest, to strengthen our economy, and the modelling that I've seen says we will continue to do just that.
The member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction. Will the minister outline to the House how the Morrison government's technology-led approach will reduce our emissions while at the same time strengthening our economy? And is the minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Moncrieff for her question and acknowledge her role in small business before she came into this place, including advising small businesses. And indeed, she knows from that experience how important technology is to the success of businesses in this great country and to bringing down emissions as we strengthen our economy, Mr Speaker. And of course, we're positioning Australia for success by investing in technologies that allow us to bring down emissions and strengthen our economy at the same time. $20 billion in our technology investment roadmap over the coming decade. We're partnering with countries around the world, Singapore, Japan, the United Kingdom, Germany, Mr Speaker, to make clean energy technologies more affordable, more reliable and therefore more widely used, Mr Speaker, and that's exactly what's happening in this country right now. This is about technology, not taxes. Now, Mr Speaker, the member knows that it's actions and outcomes that matter at the end of the day. And the runs are on the scoreboard, Mr Speaker. Emissions are down more than 20% since 2005. 1 in 4 houses in Australia with solar on the roof. That's world-beating stuff, Mr Speaker. More renewables rolled out in the last year than the entire time when those opposite were in power, Mr Speaker. And the House might be interested to know that the lowest level of renewables in the history of this country was during the Rudd-Gillard government, Mr Speaker. That's the lowest level of renewables in the history of this country. Now, we're delivering on Snowy 2. We're delivering on Snowy 2. And despite the rubbish the Leader of the Opposition was peddling out earlier today, every dam and every tunnel in Snowy 1 was delivered under a coalition government, Mr Speaker, and we're delivering Snowy 2. We've seen 10 consecutive quarters of electricity price reductions in the wholesale market, Mr Speaker. And in contrast, when those opposite were in power, we saw electricity wholesale prices rising every single quarter, Mr Speaker. We have a strong track record of bringing down emissions, Mr Speaker, and delivering affordable, reliable power, Mr Speaker. Now, there is an alternative approach. It's to talk about grand plans and dreams, but deliver nothing, Mr Speaker. Those opposite are all concept and no concrete, Mr Speaker. All concept and nothing concrete. They don't even have a 2030 target, Mr Speaker. They have no plan to get to net zero. They never lay out how they're going to do things because we know, Mr Speaker, what they always have in their back pocket is just another tax.
The member for Paterson.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources. BHP, Rio Tinto, Santos, BP and the Minerals Council of Australia all back a commitment to net zero emissions. Does the Minister for Resources back a commitment to net zero by 2050?
The Minister for Resources.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for their question. In fact, I spoke to had a text exchange with the head of the Minerals Council just yesterday, and I did have a discussion with the head of the Minerals Council in regards to their announcement. And I would note that they have an ambition for 2050, Mr Speaker. They have an ambition. Now, as I said in my previous answer, we are having a collegiate discussion in the Nationals Party room. I am absolutely respectful of my colleagues, as I'm respectful of those opposite. Now, Mr Speaker, we will continue to have that discussion. We will listen respectfully. We, of course, will consider in detail what is being put forward, as our constituents would expect. And as the Minister for Resources, Mr Speaker, I will continue to support the sector. I'll continue to do everything I can to get a job into that location, because that is what we're about. And I'll give you an example, Mr Speaker, while I'm on my feet. I have a contact here from Kenzie Gillespie. Kenzie contacted me some months ago, but I was at Moranbah North Mine just a few weeks ago where he works, and he says, I can assure you, as a 22-year-old, I've been set up for life with this golden opportunity that is here in our feet in the resources sector. Because of this, I could buy my first house at 19. I went to hold it for 2.5 years. I've recently sold it. I'm looking for acreage around the Mackay region to start primary producing on my days off. Couldn't have been done without the resources sector. And there are hundreds of thousands of Australians in exactly the same position, and we will continue to support them.
The member for Nichols.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture and Northern Australia. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison-Joyce government has responded to the significant labour challenges faced by our agricultural industries due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and is securing the industry's future by providing long-term access to a reliable workforce?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Nichols for his question and his fierce and passionate support of his producers in the Shepparton area in particular, which is a rich agricultural area. And historically, Australian agriculture has relied heavily on overseas workers to undertake seasonal work, and that's been done through the Working Holiday Maker, which before COVID hit was around 160,000 of them. It's gone down to less than 30,000. We're losing about 2,000 a month. We've also instituted Pacific schemes, the Pacific Labour Scheme, the seasonal worker programs, that have brought Pacific workers in here into this country to take up the slack. And proudly, as we faced the challenges that COVID faced and presented to agriculture last year, March last year, we told those that were here on Working Holiday Makers and those Pacific schemes that if they worked in agriculture, they could stay another 12 months. We made agriculture an essential service and ensure that those people that were committed to working in our agricultural sector, that they could stay longer. We also worked with the states, and when they asked us to have a nationally coordinated approach, we responded, and we created the Ag Workers Code, because it was great to have all these people here, but we needed to move them across state borders as the seasons changed from north to south and then back up again as the seasons moved. And unfortunately, only 3 states wouldn't sign up to that. Queensland, Western Australia and Tasmania were not prepared to sign up to, but the rest were, and that provided some continuity. And then, as we became aware of how to tackle COVID with vaccination and isolation, we worked with our Pacific family to continue to reopen up the PLS and SWP programs, and were able to pre-vet 25,000 men and women from 10 Pacific nations ready to come into this country. And the Prime Minister himself, in December, through National Cabinet, cut the red tape. He said to the Premiers that we would stamp the visas once the Premiers and Chief Health Officers in each individual jurisdiction gave the health orders in which those workers should quarantine. We said to them, this was your remit, we will get out of your way, we will stamp the visas and we will let them in. 12,500 of those have come in to date, and we are continuing to work with the states around that quarantine arrangements to make sure they prioritise agricultural workers along with bringing our Australians home. And then this year, proudly, as a core principle of the National Party, we were able to secure an agricultural visa. That's not just about seasonal workers. That's also about skilled and semi-skilled workers. This is a biggest structural change to agricultural workforce in our nation's history. This is about bringing the next generation of migrants to regional Australia and to agriculture to grow it. And this is about giving them a pathway to permanent residency. This is about making sure that we don't have a transient labour force, but one that wants to live in regional Australia and be part of it. And proudly today, the Indonesian government announced that they are one of the 4 nations that we are working with around that process. One of our nearest and dearest neighbours are working with us to make sure they are part of our solution and part of the regional Australia's future. And to the member for Nichols and Mallee and all those that have fought so hard, I thank you for your hard work.
The member for Richmond.
And my question is to the Minister for Resources. Does the minister still believe wind, solar and battery technology don't work, and investment in renewable energy delivers little more than a warm and fuzzy feeling?
The Minister for Resources.
Well, can I thank the honourable member for their question and say to the honourable member, find me a solar panel that works in the dark. I mean, this is just a statement of fact, Mr Speaker. It absolutely is. Mr Speaker,
Members
it
on
is
my
that
left.
simple. Now, I say to those opposite, are you seriously suggesting that when there is no sun, solar works? Mr Speaker, this is just a fundamental fact. So, on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, we will continue to deliver from my portfolio the things that actually make those products. They make those products. I'm not sure where those opposite think they come from. They don't fall out of the sky. They're made from Australian resources. And we will be out there looking to continue to drive forward in our sector, continue to provide more jobs and more opportunities, continue to expand into new and emerging roles because the market demands it, Mr Speaker. So once again, I mean, the line of question is quite incredible. Mr Speaker, I say to the honourable member, please step forward, ask the question about the resources sector, I'm happy to answer it. Ask a question about water, I'm happy to answer it. But questions about these things which very clearly are fundamental facts of physics, well, I'm happy to answer those too. But, Mr Speaker, I'll come back to what they're made out of. We deliver aluminium from this country. We deliver critical minerals and rare earths from this country. We deliver the things that make steel from this country. Mr Speaker, there is so much...
I just say to the minister, he's made that point, and I'm not. But this was a very specific question about whether he still had beliefs about statements he'd made. So I have given some latitude. You've had that, but you're not required to spend the entire 3 minutes on aspects outside what you were asked.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. This is why this side of the House backs reliable, affordable, dispatchable energy. There are any number of energy systems across the country. They all have their place. Mr Speaker, we look at what happens in remote communities. It is incredibly helpful for them to be able to build things which do utilise solar panels and wind, along with diesel that they already had in terms of generation. This is just a fact in terms of the electricity system. Mr Speaker, I can't get away from my background. I'm an electrician by trade and electrical engineer by profession. I get based on facts and based on physics. So, Mr Speaker, I say to those opposite, we do things that work. We provide affordable, reliable, dispatchable opportunities, as the Minister for Emissions Reduction says every single day. So, Mr Speaker, once again, I say to those opposite, we work on things that work, we deliver things based on fact, and we will continue to deliver affordable, reliable, dispatchable energy right across the country.
The member for Leichhardt.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs. Will the Minister inform the House on the progress of the Morrison government's plan to keep Australians safe from foreign criminals who flout our laws? And more importantly, is the Minister aware of any contrary approaches?
The Minister for Immigration.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the member for Leichhardt for his question. He's a long-standing and serving member of this House, and he knows and has always taken seriously his responsibility to protect community safety, to protect Australians, to protect his electorate and people from serious criminal and national security threats. I do want to say that we have had a problem in the Senate with the passage of the government's plan to protect Australians from people who commit serious crimes against them. Yesterday, the Labor Party joined the Australian Greens in voting down the government's latest laws to protect Australians from foreign criminals. 26 Labor senators and 9 Greens combined to defeat this government's plans to protect people from the most serious offences and the most serious crimes committed by non-citizens, by people who are guests of our country, or to prevent them from ever coming here in the first place, Mr Speaker. It is hard to understand. I do want to take the House through some examples and some situations of why the government feels this is important, why we're going to progress this plan absolutely, and we're going to continue to pursue this as we have for the past 3 years. And this is a very serious matter. Let's just look at one example. A permanent visa holder in Melbourne a few years ago, after 2 a.m, was driving around and saw a car being driven by a 22-year-old young female Australian woman. He followed her to her destination, climbed into her car and held a knife to her throat. He whispered, "Be quiet or I will cut you." Thankfully, this Australian was able to grab that knife and stop this perpetrator from assaulting her, and the boyfriend was able to turn up and save her as well. The perpetrator was initially charged with serious offences. And as part of a plea deal, of course, that perpetrator under our system was able to get 8 months, under the 12-month current threshold for cancellation. But this government pursued the character test and said we will cancel that perpetrator's visa. When the government tried to cancel this perpetrator's visa, this was overturned on appeal. That's why this government has put forward legislation for the last 3 years, to deal with women's safety across our country from people who are not Australian citizens. They are guests in our country. If it was up to this government, this perpetrator would have already been gone from Australia. The question, Mr Speaker, again, this is not an isolated example. This is not one example.
Members on my left.
There are dozens of examples. There are hundreds of examples. We need to act.
Member for Lawler.
The Australian Parliament needs to act. The Labor Party needs to join us, leave the Greens behind, join the government and support these laws to protect Australians from these sorts of crimes.
The member for Brand.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources. Does the minister support the government providing a $250 billion loan and insurance facility for the resources sector?
The Minister for Resources has the call.
Well, can I thank the honourable member for their question? And I say to the honourable member, the government provides support right across any number of sectors through a number of different facilities, Mr Speaker, whether it is in the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility, whether it's on the National Interest Account, whether it's across a range of others, including the RIC. Mr Speaker, the Commonwealth continues to provide support where it is needed right across the country.
The member for Barker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Assistant Treasurer, Minister for Housing, Minister for Homelessness, Social and Community Housing. Will the minister inform the House of the progress of the Morrison government's home guarantee schemes and how they're accelerating the dream for Australians of owning their own home? And, Minister, are you aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister has the call.
Well, thanks very much to the member for Barker for asking that question. Someone who has been an extraordinary advocate for first-home buyers in his regional electorate in South Australia. And, Mr Speaker, I can again report to the House that the Morrison government's first home loan deposit scheme, family home guarantee for single parents, has been an extraordinary success. Counterintuitively, in the middle of a pandemic, we have seen first-home buyers at their highest levels for nearly 15 years. But it's not just the home guarantee schemes which help first-home buyers purchase a property with a deposit of as little as 5%, because we know the barrier to home ownership for so many first-home buyers is getting that deposit together, or for single parents who, with a deposit of as little as 2% supported by the government, can purchase a home. We have also put in place the Home Builder program. The Home Builder program, which was opposed by the Labor Party. And I've got some bad news for the Labor Party, because the program that they opposed has been taken up by 135,000 Australian families. More than 200,000 Australians today are in a home because of the support of the Morrison government's Home Builder program, and each and every one of them know that if the Labor Party had their way, they would not be in their home. That is an absolute indictment on the Labor Party. We know they don't support helping first-home buyers get into the market, but what a decision in the middle of a pandemic, of all the policies to oppose the Home Builder program, a $25,000 grant for people to purchase a new home. So, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister in my time in politics is someone who has been more dedicated to first-home buyers than almost any others. There are many on this side. There are many on this side. And the Prime Minister is a Prime Minister for first-home buyers, but in this term alone, between our home guarantee scheme, between the Home Builder program and between the First Home Super Saver scheme, another program that helps first-home buyers save for a deposit, 300,000 Australians today are in a home with the support of the Morrison government. 300,000 Australians are in their own home today because of a Morrison government policy, either Home Builder or the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme or the Family Home Guarantee or the First Home Super Saver Scheme. And each and every one of those 300,000 Australians know that the Labor Party opposed the policy that helped them get into their home. Shame on the Labor Party.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The government has been in office for nearly a decade. The Prime Minister is leaving for Glasgow a week from now, but still has no climate policy. Why does the Prime Minister always delay, always blame others, and then when he does act, it's always too little and too late?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Under our government's policies, when we were first elected in 2013, we said at that election that we would meet those Kyoto targets, Mr Speaker, and we did. And we did. We beat Kyoto 1, Mr Speaker. We beat Kyoto 2. And, Mr Speaker, as we go forward to 2030, our policy on 2030 is very clear. 26 to 28%, Mr Speaker. That is the policy that, as Prime Minister, I took to the last election. Mr Speaker, that was endorsed by the Australian people at the last election. A policy, Mr Speaker, that we will not just meet, but we will beat for 2030, Mr Speaker. Now, there was another policy. It was put forward by the Labor Party. It was for a 45% reduction in emissions, Mr Speaker, and the Labor Party have walked away from that policy. They say that's no longer their policy. So there's an obvious question. What is the Labor Party's commitment on 2030? Nobody knows, Mr Speaker. Nobody knows what their commitment is to 2030. They know what the government's commitment is, and they know that under our policies emissions have fallen by more than 20% on 2005 levels, Mr Speaker, which is more than the United States, more than Japan, it's more than Canada, it's more than New Zealand, comparable economies to Australia, and Australia's track record on this issue, Mr Speaker, speaks volumes about the achievement of Australians. Mr Speaker, under our policies, Australia has one of the highest, if not the highest, rates of rooftop solar in the world. Mr Speaker, in 2020 Australia installed 7 gigawatts of new renewable energy capacity. And as the Minister for Energy has reminded the House, Mr Speaker, in 1 year, under our government's policies, we exceeded the renewable investment of 6 years under the Labor Party, Mr Speaker. And our investment is nearly 8 times faster per capita than the global average in renewables. That's around 8 times faster than New Zealand and Japan, and around 3 times faster than the United States, China, Germany and the European Union, Mr Speaker. Under our policies, emissions are coming down and jobs are going up, Mr Speaker. Under our policy, emissions are coming down and there are 1 million people now working in manufacturing. Under the Labor Party, 1 in 8 manufacturing jobs gone, Mr Speaker. That's what a carbon tax does, Mr Speaker. That's what punishing taxes does. And under our policies, we're getting emissions down, they're falling, and we're putting employment up. We're seeing exports go up. We're seeing the resources industry, the natural gas industry, the LNG industry, all of these sectors, critical minerals, clean energy supply chains being established under the policies of our government. Under those opposite, Mr Speaker, no plan,
Prime Minister's
no
time
idea.
has concluded. The member for Stirling.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry and the Minister for Science and Technology. Will the Minister please outline for the House how the Morrison government is supporting our emerging space industry, building a stronger Australia and creating more jobs, particularly as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Stirling for his question and thank him and acknowledge his outstanding former service in our ADF, and also want to thank him for his support for our local industries in our home state of Western Australia. Mr Speaker, when most people think about space, they might reflect on the Apollo missions, or they might reflect on the Dish, Star Trek, or for those that are a bit older, maybe it's my favourite Martian. But today and into the future, space is a part of our everyday lives. Space technology enables the GPS in the car and on that phone that never leaves our side. It's used by our farmers to monitor the health of our crops. And most importantly, it's used by our emergency workers to help them plan and respond to bushfires and floods. Mr Speaker, the Morrison government understands the profound benefits of space technologies on the lives of all Australians. But space is also the new jobs frontier, Mr Speaker, launching opportunities across a whole range of industries, and Australia must be a part of this global movement. Our national mission is to triple the size of the space sector in Australia to $12 billion and create up to 20,000 new jobs by 2030. And that's why the Morrison government has invested $700 million in the civil space sector when we established the Australian Space Agency back in 2018. And, Mr Speaker, that doesn't include the significant investment by our government
in the defence space capabilities announced as part of the 2020 strategic update. Mr Speaker, it genuinely was a thrill to announce recently that the Morrison government has reached an agreement with NASA, and I was very proud that the Prime Minister and I were announcing that Australia is going to the moon. This is supported with $50 million as part of the Moon to Mars initiative. An Australian-made rover will be included in a future NASA mission. Really hard for me to say that word, I don't know why. And it will happen this decade, even as early as 2026, Mr Speaker. And we are giving Australia's best and brightest scientists, entrepreneurs, researchers an opportunity to be a big part of that. So for the very first time, Australian designed and built technology will land on the moon. This is significant. Mr Speaker, I have no doubt that the Aussie rover, or Red Dog, which is just my working title at the moment, is going to inspire the next generation of scientists who are sitting at home at the moment planning their own mission into space. So, Mr Speaker, we're already a world leader when it comes to autonomous vehicles. They play an important role in our resources sector, as seen at the different mine sites in my own electorate of Durack. So, Mr Speaker, I very much look forward to working with our space sector to grow it, and so that we can have many more announcements when we say Australia is going to the moon.
The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
The Manager of